Majority Leader John Thune has yet to schedule a confirmation vote for Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, with only 2 days left until the Senate begins its August recess. His nomination moved forward on Tuesday after two holdouts, Republican Senators Thom Tillis of North Carolina and John Cornyn of Texas, received written memos from Blanche stating the president's so-called anti-weaponization fund was dead, and clarification on the president's tax audit settlement with the IRS. Senator Tillis joins us now live. He is the author of the forthcoming book, How to Lose Friends and Antagonize Presidents: The Trouble with Sycophants, Courage Outsourcing, and Partisan Groupthink. Senator, good morning. It's great to have you on the show. We'll get to the book in just a moment, but do want to ask you about that vote we just mentioned to advance Todd Blanche out of committee. How did you get to yes, given all the concerns you had and many Americans had about this so-called anti-weaponization fund?
I got to yes because Todd Blanche operated in good faith, exactly the same way he did to de-escalate and resolve the problem that I had with the president and Jay Powell. He's proven to me he's a man of his word, that he is doing the hard work. This is a difficult administration to work in, but Todd has also made it very clear. I said in the hearing that I wanted to stick a fork in the 1776 fund. It's been rescinded. We did that. We've also got language now that we believe will only allow this to appropriately apply retrospectively and to a limited number of people with respect to audits. So I think he deserves confirmation. I'm encouraging my colleagues to vote for him.
Senator, there are a lot of people, legal experts and others, who've said that this is not a binding agreement over that 1776 fund, that the administration kind of gave you this document to satisfy you and get you to vote yes, and that they have other ways that they can pay people who attacked cops, for example, and were convicted by juries of their peers. Do you not worry that the administration will find other ways to pay those criminals?
I do, but that exists in any administration, which is precisely why I asked the question about how we could kill this legislatively. And I'm still going to continue to work to make sure that no president, this one or future ones, can use a similar vehicle. There is a way to seek redress within the statutes that I think is that's appropriate. I mean, the Biden administration weaponized the Justice Department. The Obama administration, there are clearly people that probably have valid claims. What I don't like is something that appeared to cite the so-called patriots on January the 6th. There were anything from it. Many of them should still be in prison. But the Biden administration did over-prosecute people, and they do have other vehicles, even in the absence of this 1776 fund, and I would encourage them to pursue it.
You would agree, though, Senator, the Biden administration, the Obama administration did nothing on the level of pardoning, emptying the jails of people who attacked the United States Capitol and beat up cops, right?
Well, you would also agree that on his way out the door, President Biden issued blanket pardons for crimes not yet committed. And my point, and it really touches on it in the book, is that spare me the righteous indignation, Richard Blumenthal, thinking that I caved yesterday, or this week. I'm trying to find Democrats who stood up to Crossfire Hurricane, to coding businesses through Lois Lerner and the IRS. I could go on and on, but if everybody thinks that this dynamic is unique to this administration, they ought to look in the mirror.
Well, Trump has certainly not been shy about using the pardon power well beyond just those January 6th
right.
ones in his first hours in office.
And I've been very clear. If you keep in mind, I went to the floor long before I decided to retire, saying it was wrong. There are thugs that should be in prison to the maximum extent allowed by law on January the 6th. Now, if you were off the Capitol, or if you went in the Capitol, you were dumb and you should get a fine and you should probably be inconvenienced. I just don't think that they needed to be prosecuted the way they did, and that's how this all got swept up.
Senator, one more on the Blanche issue. He obviously served as President Trump's personal attorney for a long time. You have praised his judgment, but how can you square that with his willingness to go along with these measures in the first place? He was a real supporter. Yeah. He told the Senate in meetings behind closed doors. You may have been in attendance in terms of the need for this weaponization fund and the need for these IRS protections for President Trump and his family. So if he had that judgment in the first place and changed his mind perhaps under duress, why do you think he's fit for Attorney General?
Because I believe that there are a number of things that Todd have done that were wise in protecting the president. Look, the big problem I have with this administration are people who are not protecting the president and not giving him unvarnished advice. It is very difficult to do that. I understand. But I have insights into Todd Blanche that lead me to believe that he will be an acceptable attorney general. But let's go back again, too, folks. I mean, we had Merrick Garland, who I voted for, send a letter worrying about parents showing up at school board meetings as potentially domestic terrorists. So again, I just want people, before they climb up on that moral high ground, they better have a valid reason to do it. And very few of them criticizing this president or Todd Blanche have that right.
Senator, we talked earlier about how there's a Congress Senate is going to meet at the bottom of the hour about Dr. Anthony Fauci, maybe referring him for criminal prosecution. Do you agree with that?
I need to look at all the facts. I'm not on the committee of jurisdiction that interviewed him. I've never been one who thought all of Fauci's decisions were wrong or all of them were right. So I would actually have to look at the testimony. What I don't like, and this is again something that's transcended administrations, or some of these kind of perjury traps or things that we do to create a crime where a crime didn't exist. Obviously, if that's the case with Fauci, then I would say so. But right now I have to examine the record, and I have not done that.
Senator Tillis, you have been critical of Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and his conduct with the war in Iran, and the United States is facing a critical weapons shortfall. You've said that you regret your vote for Hegseth, and now you're faced with a similar choice when it comes to Todd Blanche, despite your misgivings. Epstein victims were not satisfied by the meeting that they held with Todd Blanche, and they said that it was just to check the box. Are you satisfied with how Blanche has handled the Epstein investigation? And do you think that it was right for Ghislaine Maxwell to be moved to a better security facility prison?
You know, since the Epstein revelation started in 2000, 2007, 2008, I haven't been satisfied with the Obama administration, Trump's first administration, the Biden administration, or this administration. I've been calling for releasing all the files since the revelations came forth. I feel like it is questionable. I don't know why she got transferred. It makes no sense to me. But what I will tell you is that Todd Blanche is the first head of the DOJ that's ever met with the victims. It was not a satisfactory meeting. It was a start. And he agreed to meet with them on the day that he was doing the hearing before the Judiciary Committee. So again, there's no attorney general since this issue has come up under 3 different administrations that's ever met with the victims. I intend to meet with them again without their lawyers present. The assistant attorney general doesn't have that luxury, but I want to sit down with them and talk about how we can get a case started, how we can get the FBI for the first time under 3 different presidents to actually take this seriously and take care of the victims. And then separately, there may be restitution. But right now, I want those bad people in these Epstein files to be exposed, prosecuted, and put in prison.
Senator, can you clear up and be specific about where you stand, where the legislation stands now on the potential immunity from the IRS with regard to the President of the United States and his kids?
Right now, I think what you would find, and John Cornyn is a former judge and an attorney, and I defer to him on getting the language right and getting the language in the record to make sure that if anybody tries to expand the scope, that there's a legal basis for rejecting it. But the whole idea is that, look, this President Trump has a right to be angry at President Biden because and Hillary Clinton and Obama because they prosecuted him. In fact, it's their hyper prosecution that probably got him elected a second time. And so I think it is fair to look objectively at areas where there could be some residual audits or are actions in the IRS where they should be exempt, but it can't go to his family members. It can't go to his wife, his sons, or anyone else. And I don't believe that it will be extended to them. And I believe that John Cornyn, who is the legal expert, I'm a management consultant, believes that we've done the work to get additional wording over the weekend that satisfies my concerns on the scope of the audit agreement and that has rescinded the 1776 fund. Now what we need to do is close the coffin by passing legislation that would allow no future president to do the same thing.
Yeah. So the IRS leak, of course, came during the Trump administration. Just one last question on this. I want to talk about the book. Do you believe it's appropriate for any president to have his personal attorney become attorney general, whether that's Donald Trump or Joe Biden or anybody else?
Well, the fact of the matter is Todd Blanche is no longer his personal attorney. As I understand it, it's a guy named... Yeah, he was. But, I mean, does that mean he's going to be excluded from any position going forward? I think that President Trump has
to be Attorney General of the United States, maybe.
Yeah, well, I disagree. Look, Todd Blanche went to work for the DOJ shortly after he got out of college. This man has been interested in this institution long before he ever knew Donald J. Trump.